You get one of those clapperboards.
Hey,
Yes.
welcome everybody on YouTube. And welcome to the first round of our virtual monoprint competition, which is going to be kind of a strange thing. Though we managed to do 2 rounds of it last year, so we're getting used to this virtual thing. So tonight we're lucky enough to have Roy come to judge for us again. Roy is a friend of ours from Colchester, so very warm welcome back, Roy. It's good to have you joining us and judging for us again. So looking forward to your comments this evening. So I think that's really all I've got to say for now. So I'll hand over.
Actually, but just before we do, so whilst with the judging is going on, if everybody can mute their mics, people are getting the hang of this. That's good news. So if you can do that, and in fact, if you want to mute your camera as well, that I think does improve the general speed of things. So over to Roy.
Right. Well, thanks very much for inviting me back to the club and to judge your monochrome print competitions. You know, I do really like prints, colour and monochrome, but of course here we're judging them online, so they're not actually prints per se. I was asked to try, when I'm sort of looking at the images, to try and sort of think what they would be like as a print, but that's obviously very, very difficult, because when you're judging a print competition, it's not just about the image, it's about, you know, whether that image works on the paper, it's the presentation, etc., etc. But what I will do is you know, make some comments as I go through on some of the images to, you know, whether it would, you know, would suit a monochrome print, and perhaps on occasion what paper I would choose to have done that particular print on. So anyway, without any further ado, we've got 50 odd images to get through. So a minute and a half an image. I'll try and stick to that. So on with the show. Okay,
I will do a quick run through, and just to tell everybody, it's coming up in alphabetical order for Roy, but the numbers won't be from 1 to 57. So just to let you know what's happening there, and we will have an interval either 8:30 or sort of halfway through the images. So I will just do a run through.
If you need me to speed up, please just shout. That's not the judge.
Ooh. Like it. Oh, that's Rogers.
Okay, that's a run through. And we will start with 1940 model.
Yes, yeah, portraiture can frequently make a really good image rendered as a monochrome, as generally we have here. I think you know, the attire, and as the name suggests, the sort of 1940s era, I think particularly suits monochrome, because largely that was sort of what we tended to have in that particular period of time. She's an attractive lady. I particularly like the hairstyle, and I like the tassels on the shoulders of the garment that she's wearing. So all that is good. I think the light on her face, which is very, very important, particularly in portraiture, is good. And I particularly like the shadow that's being cast on her the eyelid on her right eye. It adds a sort of an extra element, really. So they're all positives. Equally, I like the hint of something in the background. We don't know what it is, but it's not a plain black background. It's shades of a darker tone. There's two things, or three things actually, I think I would have suggested would have made and improved this image. First of all, she's got a cigarette in a cigarette holder that is predominantly black in color, and you lose where that goes up on that angle. It's cutting her ear, and also the black of the cigarette holder itself is actually blending in with her hair, so it's difficult to actually make that out. So I think the positioning of that spoils the image. The other thing I would have liked is we can just see part of the hand creeping up from the bottom, and I would have liked to have seen more of this particular lady. A bit more of a hand and her arm, and I think that would have made for a stronger composition. And lastly, you don't always need eye contact, but I think in this particular case, if she turned and looked at the photographer, it would have made such a more powerful image. I don't know whether it was a studio shoot, perhaps at the club, and she was looking at someone else, and you've photographed her, and that's why she's looking away from you. But those elements, I think, are what sort of those three elements are to me what drags the image down a bit. I do like the tones you've got in her hair where it's flicked up onto a shoulder. We can just make out some detail in the shadows there. And the other important thing with a portraiture is hands. You don't want them clenched, so we've got a bit of separation between the fingers. So there's some pluses and there's some minuses. So and part of my role obviously is to give, is to try and help and give advice if I can. Whether you take it or not, it's up to you. It's an image that, as far as printing is concerned, I would definitely print on a glossy-ish type paper, not a gloss, but on that type of traditional paper. So that gets an 8.
A lifetime's work.
Yeah, hands, but I just talked about hands in portraiture, but this isn't portraiture. This is, a study of hands, and it's a subject I've seen captured before. Particularly sort of older people's hands, and whether it's showing some life. Here it says, a lifetime's work. I looked at the image and I thought, well, is it believable, or is someone just made their hands dirty for the sake of the photograph? And asking myself the question, then what I did is I looked hard at the fingernails, because if the fingernails were clean, if the fingernails were manicured, it would spoil that whole illusion, if you will. But here, if you look at the fingernails, as I have done, they are chipped. There is dirt under the fingernails, which is also good. It's not just dirt under the fingernails, the fact that the fingernails themselves are chipped. I think the framing is good. We've got this sort of strong V effectively coming in from top left, top right, coming down through the center of the image. And also I think the tones within this particular monochrome study is good. So that's an 8.5.
Or the end.
Yep, I'm guessing this was perhaps an infrared. I don't know for certain, but it's got that sort of look. But maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe it simply isn't. In fact, when I'm looking at it, more I look at it, the more I'm thinking maybe it isn't infrared. But that doesn't really matter, because I like infrared as well, even if it was. I think, you know, the building is, as the title suggests, is a magnificent building. You know, the architecture, the history, and I think you framed that particularly well. You know, you've got all the trees. You can't see the ground floor of the building. You can just see sort of like the first floor, and the roof line set against the sky, and it's held in bookend, if you will, by the trees on the left and trees on the right. And I think the inclusion, you know, it's not, there's people in the image, but they don't, you know, then there's not a lot of people. So, and they're separated. So, you know, you've got these sort of two pair of people. It gives the impression of being a summer's day, and therefore the light is good. So, and I think as a monochrome, all the tones are equally well handled. Even in the highlights of the clouds, there is a little bit of detail in those light areas. So well done on that. That also gets an 8.5.
Beauty and the Beast.
I enjoyed this. You know, it's very sort of stark. It's the industrial landscape for the most part, or a bit of industry within the landscape. It's got a certain glow to the image as well, that I'm assuming has been applied sort of post capture. It's a sort of, you know, myself, if I think part of the success of an image is, first of all, if you were there, would you have taken an image of this particular subject? And undoubtedly the answer is yes, and I probably would have tried to come at it from different angles, assuming I was able to. I think the chimney is very dominant, but there's space all the way around it. But it is, you know, you do get the impression of size. The sky has got a bit of detail in it, but it doesn't overpower the rest of the image. And also, I'm pleased that there is good detail and structure and clarity in the foreground and in the building itself, but the sky has got a much softer feel. So whatever the technique has been applied to get the sharpness and contrast and clarity, it hasn't been applied all the way through the image, or if it has, it's then been removed in the sky. So I like that. Looking at the image, down at the base, you've got these sort of trees, and I'm not suggesting for one moment it is, but the repetition you've got of the thin trunks is the sort of thing you get when you're sort of trying to clone out. I know it's not. I know they're each individual, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that it has been cloned, because it hasn't. But it does sort of draw the eye. And what I think I would have done is either cropped a little bit off the base or darkened the base, to lead the eye up, but it is a pleasing image, and I like the composition. I like the fact you've got space around it. So that's the first of a number that I'm holding back. I enjoy still life. With lockdown, I'm promising myself I'm going to do more. I've been saying that since March, but I've got a couple of projects in mind, so I will be doing that. And bottles, you know, this is very much a low-key image. Bottles can be, there's a certain technique, you know, to photograph in bottles to get sort of the highlights and the shadow areas. And of course, you know, it's important to have interesting bottles. These are the type of bottles I think I remember collecting as a child and getting money back on the bottle. So that some of them are sort of quite old. So I think the subject is there. I think the composition is a little bit off, because you've got the group sort of to effectively to the left of center, and those other three over on the right side of the image, but there's lots of detail. You can't make out the structure, so there's no detail in those shadow areas. And it's important when you've got this type of subject that you can, you've got definition and you can provide sort of separation. So I think it's, I think that's, you need to sort of control the shadows and the highlights, particularly when you're talking about monochrome, because it's all about tones. So I think it's that those three particularly on the right hand side, which lets the image down. And I think the grouping I think is a little bit cluttered. 7.5 for that one.
Bridge House, Ambleside.
Yeah, it's a sort of place, a building which suits and presumably in a village, which clearly it is, suits monochrome treatment because it's a timeless place. So I can well understand why you've photographed it. It's an interesting building sat across that particular bridge, and you can see the building over on the right hand side that is predominantly light, and I think that's useful because it helps to break up the tones across the image. I think I would have lost the car with what appears to be headlights on. I think that's a little bit of an annoyance, and that would have been dead easy to have cloned out. The other interesting thing, and I had to look at this, I thought, what is that over the doorway of the building in the background? And so I opened it in Photoshop and in close because it looked like a flying pig, and that appears to be exactly what it is. So that's a strange structure. Coming back to the image, the parapet on the down in the bottom left-hand corner, I really, and that's probably my biggest or sort of my largest sort of criticism, for want of a better word. I would have liked a bit of space so you can see actually the wall of the parapet and just a little bit of path. So I think coming back a little bit to just give us a little bit more of a slither rather than that arc just kissing the left-hand side would have improved the image. And I also think that perhaps dealing with some of the monochrome tones, making, deciding what parts you want to make a little bit, a bit of dodging and burning would also add strength to the image. A bit of dodging, lightening up in the water that we see flowing in the stream underneath. I think, for example, and also some of the individual bricks or stones rather that make up the structure of the house, because there's a lot of greys in this particular image and it's a monochrome, so you really want to get a good range of tones. And I think that would have made strengthened the image. As it is, that's an 8.
City World.
Another still life. It's given this sort of antique toning. That's the first thing that becomes immediately obvious, and I can well understand why you've chosen to do that. It's quite pleasing, and obviously the subjects are very much of yesteryear. So those two things, that's what obviously was in your mindset. When it comes to still life, and I might have mentioned this before when I've been to the club, and it's largely as a result of some of the mistakes I've made trying to set up a still life, because setting up a still life in the home is the hardest. I've said this so many times. It can be really challenging to get it right. So where the various objects sort of come together and they look right. Here, I think the placement of the two objects looks a little bit deliberate, and I wonder, I would have played around with that. Also, given this subject, I think sharpness is important, and it's difficult to read, and you do need to be able to read the numbers and letters that we see, through the image. So I don't think it's quite come off. I certainly would go back again, and also perhaps try and find a third object, because the two in isolation, you really want something else, perhaps a pen or a book or something, or maybe a reel of cine, just to unite the various objects and make them all gel together as one. So that was a 7.5.
Adrian.
I enjoyed this image. It's an image that I think would definitely suit a print. It's an image that if I was doing a print, I'd print it on a texture type paper. I say that because, I think I'm correct in saying a number of judges would say, oh, it's not sharp, there's a load of noise through the image, etc., etc. But I think all that suits the image. I like the two main elements, the lady laying down. She's got a light bikini top on that provides, I've got to choose my words carefully. I was going to say an interesting thing to look at, but it actually breaks up the tones. That's what I'm trying to say. And interestingly, the bushes and the various growth that we see along the line of the grass that she's laying on, I think are also, they're not sharp, but they also add to the image. One thing I think I would have done, and if you hold your finger over it, is the towel or whatever it is that's laying on the ground above her head. I would have definitely removed. I would definitely have removed that. I don't know whether that's my. Just bear with me one moment. I think I might have got. Let me just. That might be my Outlook that's open, so sorry for the pinging. Yeah, so I really did enjoy this, and I think it would make a very interesting print, and it's different. So I'm holding that one back.
11 hours, 11 minutes.
Yeah, I couldn't quite make out, where 11 hours and 11 minutes, and I'm assuming it's is it the last dial that we see down in the bottom right hand corner? I'm not sure, but you ask yourself, why is there so much loss of detail? You've got these various faces of this timepiece, but a lot of them are just cut off. Take the one at the top left. We can only see less than half of that particular dial face, and as you're coming through the image, there is that sort of loss of detail. And then I ask, you've got the edge of the bezel of the watch up in the top right, and you've got that very bright arc just kissing, and you put a stroke around the image, and you've got that bright arc just kissing one edge of the frame, and it's mirrored down in the bottom left. So I just wonder why, the approach. I just don't think it's worked, and also there's a uniformity in the layout. So you ask yourself, well, what was in the mind of the photographer? What were they trying to achieve? And maybe you set out, what you've achieved is exactly what you've set out to achieve, which is fine. It's your image, but I can only comment it as I see it. And I think that loss of detail is really holding the image back. So that was a 6.5.
Eye contact.
Yeah, this is sort of like an everyday image. If you go out, do a bit of street photography or whatever, you can see people engaging all the time. But I enjoyed this. And the reason I enjoyed it on so many different fronts. First of all, the main thing I enjoyed was the look. You can see where she's looking into the eyes, and it's very much about her, because you can see her face, her eyes, her hair, the little ribbon thing that she's got in her hair, and she's looking at this guy in quite an engaging way, and there's a certain happiness that comes across on her face. You can only see a little bit of the chap. You can just see his forehead, part of an eyelash, and part of a cheek. But that's enough to know that he's actually smiling. I just get the feeling he's smiling at her. So there's this great interaction between these two people. Excellent detail through the image, and I think also the fact that she's slightly smaller than her. I think the dynamic that runs through the image on that sort of the angle that's sort of running through the image is also good. Complemented by the sky, so it's not an image that's been pushed heavily. It's been sensitively handled, and I think it's well seen and a particularly pleasing picture. So well done. You've caught a nice moment between the engagement between these two people. 8.5.
Feeling Fuji.
I love the title. That made me smile. It's you've got this object, and okay, it's somebody else's piece of art, or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's something that you've actually made yourself. How do I know? But it's certainly an interesting little sculpture sitting there. Also, we don't know how big this is. We can perhaps get some sort of idea, but we don't really know, because it might be quite small, it might be quite big. But what you've done is you've taken a fairly simple object, well, it's not simple, a very interesting object, and actually put it on a little bit of white seamless, or maybe a card, and then you've lit it from the left-hand side to create this sort of quite interesting shadow on the backdrop, and obviously that's elongated. The light that you've used on that seems to be sort of fairly soft, or it's probably up close, and that's why you haven't got any sharp edges around the shadow. They've got this sort of softness, this glow. So it's a simple image, but it's a very interesting one, a pleasing one. So I've got to compliment you on that, and for that reason, I'm giving it an 8.5.
That's calm.
Yeah. Obviously a high key image. This type of image, because it's high key, would work printed on something like Permajet Portrait White. I wouldn't see it printed on a glossy type paper, because there's no real deep blacks. It's very much effectively an arty image. We've got the zigzags leading us up through the image to the objects that we see sort of in the mid distance, and the post that is just linking the sea with the horizon. Used a choice, it's clearly been used with a neutral density filter, so it's quite an excessive shutter speed that you've it's time lapse. I don't know, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe longer. But does it work? For me, I think there's a bit too much white in the image, and I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more definition running through, where those elements in the foreground zigzagging up, where there's a little bit more sort of clarity. So maybe it's the state of the tide. I'd go back. I think there's certainly a picture there. And the other thing I would try and do is to try and get it, if you're able to, where things are much more sort of symmetrical. Maybe that's not possible, given where the post is. And I think what I would have done is I would have just moved it over a little bit in post to try and get everything to sort of line up. So I'd go back and try and do it again, perhaps on with a slightly different tide. You do want to see those bits of the jetty going out, so you've got that linkage, I think, and perhaps a bit more texture, a bit more tone in the water itself would help. 7.5.
4:50 in the morning.
Yeah, obviously an image that's been taken fairly recently. That for the obvious reasons, the sign and the fact it's pretty deserted. I think the tones in the image are very good. You've got sort of darks, there's no detail in the sky, but I'm not really bothered about that. It's not about the sky, this type of image. So you've got the shop fronts, the road, the pathways, all sort of leading us up, and for the most part, absent. Well, I think it's a total absence of people. So it's a good record shot, but tonight is about a competition, and you need to provide images that are sort of perhaps a little bit more exciting than we see here. Also, we've got a touch of the verticals are not vertical, and I would certainly, they're slightly leading inwards, and I would certainly suggest that with this type of image, because they're only slightly, I would certainly straighten those. But it's just the excitement of the image, I think, what is missing. You've captured it well, and perhaps it's because the shots themselves are not particularly sort of interesting. So that's got a 7.
Frozen agapanthus.
Yeah, we've got a number of, and I think the one that follows is another frozen subject, and I've tried that myself on a couple of occasions, not with too much success, and I think it's one of these things you need to persevere at, and I sort of gave up really, and I shouldn't. Looking at this image, you ask yourself, well, some images work well in monochrome, others are best left in colour, and this is an image I think personally would possibly look better provided as a colour and perhaps sort of pastely, the pastel colours that we would see in this particular study. So that's sort of my main concern, and I think also the colour version would help to provide differentiation between the various flowers and the stems and the petals and the whiteness that surrounds it. So it's for that reason only. I'm not sure that the particular subject is the right one for monochrome. I think what I would have done is perhaps to try and darken some of the stems to actually provide increased tonal values going through the image. May well have helped, but that gets us 7.5.
Frozen mushrooms.
I confessed when I first looked at this image, because I didn't look at the title, I thought that it was an underwater shot, taken perhaps of some coral and that sort of thing, because you do see, we haven't got any colour in this image, and because of that, I thought, well, is that what it is? And of course, then when I sort of looked at the title, I realised it's not that at all. It's just frozen mushrooms, and you've got this sort of filigree effect through the image. But again, I think, well, is that a suitable, I would certainly continue with trying to freeze certain things and then photograph them when you take them out. I'm told that it's also best to use distilled water, not normal tap water, for frozen subjects. That's just come in, that little bit of advice has just come in to my head. I read that somewhere. But again, you're looking around the image, and there's nothing that really sort of comes out and bites me and think, wow, I like the texture, but it's an image that I don't find particularly exciting. And perhaps if you were to try and deal with some of the tones in a much more sort of harsher way to get some dark blacks, to provide some separation, it may well be make a stronger image. As it is, that's a 7.
Gorilla.
Yeah, it says gorilla. Sometimes you look at trees and where you've got knots, and some of them can make for an interesting study. I remember Brian Beanie, who some of you may know, he's an artist, used to belong to Beyond the Group. I don't see him around much now, but he was at one time a member of Ipswich. Very creative, and he did a whole study of trees, and he walked certain things, and he within the textures and twist and turn and made sort of like little goblins and this, that and the other. This is obviously not of that ilk, but it sort of reminded me of the subject matter and what the potential is. Given this, we've got a knot, is clearly an eye. I can understand that, but as a gorilla, it's a knot of a tree that clearly shows an eye. It doesn't immediately strike me as being one of a gorilla, but I accept that that's obviously in not so in the mind of the photographer. But to me, it just didn't work. Good tones, good monochromatic tones. It's just the subject, so I gave that a 6.
Grey heron at night.
Yeah, I've seen a number of images of various types taken at night or with flash, but maybe you know, setting the camera to underexpose the ambient light by sort of 3 stops, and then using flash to just illuminate the subject. And that's good for portraiture, good for all sorts of things. So it's a, you know, it's a good flash technique to provide this sort of separation, the sort of thing we see here as a general sort of, from a technical standpoint. We've got this heron in the water, really good sort of reflections. I particularly like the feather detail you know, on the body, and the light strokes that's coming across. You can see where the heron's got its beak in the water. You can just about make its eye out, and the splash of water. And I think that's growing, the plant and the bud that's growing and showing it over on the right hand side is an important element, because it provides a little bit of an anchor. So you know, I do quite like that aspect. Ideally, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of the head and a bit more of the beak as it's just going in, and perhaps where the splash of the water doesn't quite kiss the eye. But you know, there's a lot to commend the image equally. So I got an 8.5.
Hovercraft.
Yeah, there used to be, I don't know whether these are still going, to be quite honest. Maybe they are, you know, but one time they were all the vogue, of course. And, you know, and interesting, I once went on one. They're very, very noisy. But here the sky, I think, is interesting. You know, you've got this filigree elements in the highlights of the sky. You can see where it's sort of just coming up on the beach. And the all that froth where that's being created, not in the waves, but where it's sort of just hitting the beach and sort of just coming back. And also I like the fact you've given us a bit of the beach, and just that a bit of landmass over on the right hand side. So I think compositionally it stands up fairly well in the frame, and I think most of the tones are quite good. I think what I would have done is I would have tried to have brought out a little bit more detail in the shadow areas at the front of the hovercraft, and perhaps try to play around with some of the lighter areas on the superstructure itself, to just try and, you know, this is a monochrome, so you do need, it's all about tones, and I think I would have lightened up some of the area, you know, where it says Solent Flyer, and that part, just to make it pop. I think it's not, what I'm trying to say is when I look at the image, it's looking a little bit flat. And I think with a little bit more clarity and a little bit more sort of care, you could have made the hovercraft itself, because that's what it's all about, really just stand out a little bit more in the frame and have a more of a sort of a 3D effect. As it was a pleasing image. The horizon, such as it is, seems to be straight, so that got an 8.
It's seen something.
Yeah, very, very close up study, and you know, the eyes are crystal clear, the whiskers are crystal clear. There's an intense, you're just giving us a bit of the mouth, and most of the face is over onto the to the left hand side, looking out of the frame. Sometimes that can be seen as a negative. In this particular case, I don't, because it's an easy image to look at. There's a lot of tones, a lot of patterns in its fur, and in you know, the black spots and the whole texture on the coat of the cat, and you can make all that out. There is a light, catch light in the eyes. There's an intense stare, and also like the differential focus, where the back, you know, on its back of the animal is going slightly out of focus, and I think that helps. So it's a very, I think, you know, that was clearly what the photographer intended. Whether it's a crop of a bigger image, I don't really know, but does it work? Yes, I think it does, because there's good clarity, and it's interesting and good engagement. 8.5.
Just rolling along.
Oh, I thought this was so well seen. and say that dogs and their owners, there's a certain similarity. They tend to be referring to faces when they're talking about that, but there's a certain similarity going on here in other ways, and I'm not going to say any more about that. We can't see the face, the face of the person. We can see the face of the dog. They're both appear to be walking into the frame and at a slight angle. The dog is coming in at a slight angle from the right hand side. The lady appears to be coming in from a slight angle to the right side. You've given us a bit of space on the left hand side where you haven't cropped her bag out. There's some sort of vehicle, boot of a vehicle in the background, and those don't really bother me at all. I just think that it's a well seen image, and I think there's a certain message that comes across, and that's an important aspect in photography. So that was another one I did enjoy, and I held that back.
Lady in white.
Yeah, there's a soft, in this particular image, there isn't sharpness. There's a subtlety, almost like a glow to the way this attractive lady has been captured. And I think you can see all her back and the curvature of her spine, and as it goes down slightly to her buttocks. But I think it's been sensitively handled. The top of the dress has got a certain laciness to it that suits the image. You've got the eyes are obviously at an angle, and I think the fact you've got the chin is not kissing her left shoulder. You've got a bit of a break there. It is all good. And I also like the way the hands are just delicately touching her right arm. Hand is delicately touching the top of her left arm. So there's a certain sort of glow about the image, and I think it's been sort of quite well handled. It's a black background, but there's a slight graduation of the black tones. It's not black, but you can see as you're going down the image, it gets very marginally lighter, and you can just see what appears to be perhaps the seat that she's sitting on. But you've given us the whole of the V at the back of the dress. So I think of its type, it's been well handled. So that was another one I held back.
I am masked.
Yeah, I think I recognise some of the people. I think it's a good title. For all sorts of reasons, the mask that we've got, and obviously we're talking about photography here, and obviously layer mask has a different connotation to us photographers. There's obviously an exhibition, people are showing their work. The guy who, the three main characters, the two ladies talking to each other, with a chap in the background, bang in the middle. So he's not engaged in the conversation, but that group of three works so well together. They're so equally spaced, if you like, with the space between the people. Interestingly, the two ladies have got masks on, so is the guy. Normally you want to see the whole of the face, but you can see their eyes, you can see they're talking to each other. And I think even the two guys that we've got in the distance over on the right hand or on the left hand side are also important within the image. So I think it's been particularly well captured, and as a piece of work, I like it for various reasons, and including the way that the tones have been handled. So it's one of those images, you look around and you see the people, you see the images in the background, you see the guy when he's holding his glasses, he's taking his glasses off, perhaps because his glasses are steaming up. I wear glasses, I know that can be a problem. And I even like, the floor. In fact, my wife commented, she had to come in when I was looking at this, and commented on the tile floor and the bits of wood and the timber elements. So yeah, that was another one I held back. So that's three I held back on the trot. It's downhill from now.
Yes, yes, we
yeah, I'm assuming, and the assumptions can be wrong, that maybe this was one of those statues, if you will, the cutouts that were created to commemorate, the war, and there was a whole row of them down on Mersey Causeway that various people have photographed at various times of the day, and they've made some interesting subjects here. We've just got sort of the silhouette of the soldier, head slightly bowed, holding his rifle, and quite a heavy key line around the frame. And I think it's the whiteness of the key line is detracting from the overall image, because it's the brightest part. The soldier, the main picture itself isn't black. It's just, for the most part, sort of a tone of a uniform grey. And I just feel that I just wanted more, really, and why have we got just such a I can't understand why the subject itself and the background are so uniformly the same tones. So it's a bit of monochrome work. I just question it, really. It didn't really work for me. Unfortunately, 6.
Let battle commence.
Yeah, chess, and of course it helps. Chess pieces being one's lighter tone in colour than the other. So as subjects, and they can be quite interesting. Certainly some of the older chess pieces, but again, it's this type of image. I really want to see detail in the shadow areas. I want sort of better uniformity, and also the placement of the subject. There's a lot that's sort of overlapping with each other as you're looking across. I think they've been lined up actually on the chessboard, ready for a game. I just wonder whether to actually break that pattern up and have less chess pieces, perhaps showing a shape as chess pieces are placed on the chessboard itself, might have made for an interesting picture. I think just as it is, there's a lot going on and you're not quite sure which ones to look at. So I think it's one of those images that I think less pieces, and it would made for a simpler composition, and perhaps use those chess pieces, the placement of those chess pieces, to make an interesting shape as they're going through across the chessboard, is really something that are my thoughts looking at this image. 7.
Living statues and a ghost.
Yeah, I'm assuming that the guy and the lady centre and on the left are the sort of mime artists. You give us some money and they then move. And some of them are, their outfits are just incredible, and you see them, on hot summer's days, and you think, how are they managing to stand in all that heat? But they can make interesting subjects. But any subject, the composition, the backgrounds can make or break an image. And here I'm finding, first of all, the National Gallery, the words in the background. Do we really need those? You've got the other figure that is then coming into the scene, the one on the right-hand side, the ghost we are led to believe that has presumably been composited into the image. And I think that's, the composition appears to have been done well. Then on top of everything else, there appears to be some sort of texture overlay that's applied, and that texture overlay is a streaked type overlay. It's not a sort of a pattern, a subtle pattern. The overlay has actually got streaks in it, and I think that's just gone too far. Particularly on the glazier on the National Gallery, where you've got these sort of light areas, and when you're going to, I would suggest that when you're actually putting on overlay on an image, and I do it myself, is you then got to decide what parts of that texture overlay you perhaps want to remove, and the way the shadow on the ghost is coming across halfway up her skirt. I think I would have removed part of that darker shadow area just to try and make the whole thing work a little bit better. I also think the image is a little bit sort of over bright. So I think there's lots of good things about it, but I think, you know, I would ask you to go back and perhaps revisit it, perhaps take on board some of the suggestions I've made. I certainly, nothing wrong with overlays. I just think you've chosen the wrong one with this particular image, because it just adds to the busyness, and there's already enough going on already without the, you know, these streaks. So that got an 8. I enjoyed this image because it's, you know, well, first of all, the location seems to be an interesting location. You can see the brick wall in the background. It's not recent, and all those arches. So, you know, there's obviously a bit of history in the location, and also on the road surface itself with all these cobbles, although they're sort of much more recent. But it's the way the guys just stand there. Okay, he's posed for you, but he's posed in what appears to be sort of quite a natural way. I quite often say with figure studies, it always helps if you can get separation between the limbs rather than the arms up tight against the body, because it then forms a bulk. And this is a good example where, you know, he's on a sort of a walking stick. You can see where he's resting his hand on that, but you've got space between his right arm and his body and his leg. There's a bit of separation between the limbs of the chap himself. He's put his left hand just tucked into on his hip, and he's just stood there, and he looks quite an interesting character. Having managed to capture, you know, this full portrait, he looks to me as though he's got a really interesting face. And I just hope you've then gone up much closer and perhaps done a 3/4, and then perhaps managed to just capture his face as a separate, you know, as a separate picture. So I think it's pictures within the picture, but I do like it. It's a straight piece of photography, and I think very pleasing because of the aspect and the way he's positioned, also slightly over to the left of centre. So that got an 8.5.
Minder or stalker?
Yeah, again, it was a bit like the previous image. I didn't look at the titles. I looked at the images first of all, and you know, looked at the lady. Where, you know, she's walking towards you. She's got these tattoos. She's got, you know, she's quite an attractive lady. Got an interesting face. What she's wearing is interesting. And then you see the guy in the background, and you think he looks a bit pervy. He looks the way he's almost like sort of, he's got sunglasses on. So that's because people can't see his eyes. The way he's sort of looking, the stride, you know, there is, yeah, and these are all things that going on in your imagination. But you think, is he stalking her? He appears to have very much his eye on her. He's got one hand in his pocket, and the way the other hand. So everything about that other chap and her, the juxtaposition and the expressions and the whole body language of those two people really work well together. And that's what I thought. And then I looked at the title, Minder or Stalker, and I thought the photographer has seen exactly the same as what I saw in my mind, and therefore, you know, that's come across. So that must have strong merit. And I did enjoy the picture very much so. I think even the people in the background who are walking away from these two, so they haven't seen what's going on. They're not seeing what's about to happen, perhaps. So yeah, that was another one I definitely held back. I did enjoy that.
NHM.
Yeah, Natural History Museum. You know, museums, our architecture that we have in London, you know, it's the envy of you know, of the world over. And when you see Natural History Museum, that's got to be one of the most beautiful museums. There's others that are sort of different, but I think Natural History is just such an amazing place. And not just that, but with all the exhibits here, you know, we are showing some of the building is very sort of symmetrical. You know, we're led statue down the bottom center. So that's all sort of been handled. There is some converging verticals going on. Would I have liked those straightened? Perhaps, maybe not, but they are, you know, they seem to be sort of quite deliberate. So I'm fairly relaxed about that. And there's a lot to look at as your eye goes round. Is it an image that works better as in a colour? Bearing in mind we know what this place looks like. Possibly, I can equally understand why you've chosen to do it as a monochrome. So I'm fairly relaxed on that point. 8.5.
On my mark.
Yeah, cannons they're sort of forming an arc as they're going around and getting more and smaller as they're disappearing around in this arc over onto the top left of the corner. There's reasonable detail in the cannons, particularly the ones that are one in the foreground, and then it gets less so as you obviously go around looking at the other cannons. So, you know, you've been quite clear on what you want to, what you want to be the star within the picture. I think monochrome. I think we, given that cannon in the foreground, I think I would have, if it was mine, I would have brought a bit more clarity into the cannon in the foreground a little bit, and progressively, so it becomes much more, as I mentioned before, you're looking to create a 3D effect from a 2D medium, and you can do that in a number of ways. So I think I would have made the cannon in the foreground a little bit more bite to it. Compositionally, I also would have liked a little bit more space under the rear wheel of the cannon down in the bottom left. The other thing I'm bound to comment on, naughty, is the horizon isn't straight. Dead easy to do that, but it's clearly sort of at an angle. And I think, that is something that we've got a horizon. You should always look at that because they should be straight. So yeah, 7 for that.
The next image will be the last before the interval.
Okay. Yeah, this image on the move. It's the texture. We know these are can be very colourful creatures, and the colour, as a colour version, it would also make a very good image. I think the photographer has done well to capture, the creature as it is, very sharp on the head, on its right paw and the claws. There's lots of detail in there. His left one is moving, and there's a little bit of movement in that, and that's fine. I don't mind that at all because it gives a little bit of life. And as you look through the image, as you go across the body and towards the back, you've got the differential focus coming into play, where it gets a bit more softer and softer as we're going through. And again, I think that's fine. There's good detail, good sharpness, good clarity where it needs to be. And I think also it works particularly well as rendered as a monochrome here. So it's one of those subjects, I think, and you could have it as a colour or as a monochrome. And sometimes the problem is you're not quite sure which one you like best, but that's a nice problem to have. 8.5.
Can we come back and start again at 20 to 9?
Yep, 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes, Passiflora.
Hey, Susan, we shouldn't have stopped for the break. Yeah, this is another image that, because we know how colourful these particular flowers are, and it also, but when you're actually rendering it as a monochrome, you can still see the beauty within the flower itself. So again, it's another one of those flowers I think that works equally as a colour or as a monochrome. So then you've got your object, but then you've got to make a picture out of out of it, unless you're going to make it just a pure sort of flower study and go, you know, into the center and try and perhaps create something a bit different. So here, this is obviously a still life. It's a simple image in many ways. There's three elements. There's the flower head, there's the leaves, and the vase. But they do all complement each other. I mentioned before about how it's the arrangement that is in many ways, when you got a still life, it's the arrangement that is probably one of the most important aspects. And I do like this. It's presented as a square. I think there's good space all the way around the image. I like the shadow that we've got, the subtle shadow underneath the vase itself, which provides an anchor. The other interesting thing I noticed when looking at this, so initially you're just looking at a flower. When you look into the center of the flower, can you see a face of a dog? You know, that it's got a mouth open and the nose of a dog and the eyes of a dog. Maybe it's me, you know, you're looking at a screen too long, but you know, I did enjoy this image. Again, it's a monochrome, but you've decided to give it this warm tint to it. It's almost like it's on a pinkish scale, subtly. So it's not a black and white image. As a tone been applied to it, but I think suits the image as well. So yeah, there's one held back. So that's a good start to the second half.
What's moth?
Yeah, this moth is obviously quite a beautiful moth on this particular branch. You can see there's very, very good detail in the wings and you know, on the whole of the creature itself, and even, you know, its leg that is draped across over the lower down the branch. The branch itself, particularly at the back of the creature, is a little bit soft in terms of you know, the focus, but I don't mind that at all. The photographer here has decided to put a key line around the image, and I think that's important when you've got a pure black background. It contains the image, because otherwise you wouldn't know where the image starts and finishes and where the screen is relative to it. The branch is on a slight angle, and I think that is also good. So I think, you know, you've captured it well. Is it an image that suits monochrome treatment? I think the jury's out on that, but I think you have technically captured it. Particularly, you know, it's you know, you've done a good job. So that's an 8.
Remember.
Oops, I've just lost my way just here. Sorry, what was this one? Remember. Yep. First thing you notice about this image is asymmetry. You could almost be forgiven for thinking that it's an image that has been in half and then flipped, because you know, you do tend to ask yourself that question, but you very quickly look into the details on the left and on the right, and you realize that no, that's not the case, and it's only because of the pure symmetry we've got. There's a slight arc being formed in along the roof line, if you will, of the structure. I do appreciate the tones that we've got, because even in the roof line, you can easily make out the formation of the roof and the columns themselves. Looking at I think there's a certain distortion though occurring in the image, both on the roof line, because you can see it as an arc being formed, to some extent on the pavias at the bottom. But if you look at the columns, particularly the one just coming in from the right hand side, you can see there's a little bit of bellowing on there, and obviously the verticals are not totally vertical, almost. So you know, I think that's something that there's ways of dealing with that if it's something you feel that you should deal with. Personally, I would. The sky is to me a little bit busy. I think I would have the tones, I think, in the sky, the darker tones, I think I would have made those much lighter to try and give this feeling of airiness. So you're going through the columns, you're down the path, you go to the cross, and the sky behind it is a little bit more lighter in tone. I think that would it would draw the eye and would just ease it a little bit. But you have captured it well, and there's good tones, there's good monochromatic tones running all through the image, apart from obviously the two trees or bushes, whatever they are, to either side of the cross. But you're not going to get detail in that. That's just the nature of that type of tree. So 7.5 for that one.
Renovation project.
Yeah, this type of image abounds round on obviously the Anglian coast. There are various places you can go to and see wrecks, and they're changing all the time. Felixstowe Ferries, one, Pin Mill, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes they suit the monochrome treatment. Other times they're best left as a colour. I think in this instance there is a lot of grey through the picture space. The most interesting part I do find is the exhaust pipe that's sticking out into the roof line of the wreck that we see sort of in the foreground. So I think it's a difficult subject unless you're going to really do quite a bit of dodging and burning to actually bring more bite to the image and more tonal separation. Sometimes this particular subject can be sort of quite hard to do that. And also it's the composition. I do find the composition just a little bit messy. There are sometimes, I went down to Felixstowe Ferry recently and really struggled to get a decent composition because of stuff that was in the foreground, such as this this gangway that we see coming in from the right hand side. How better it would have been if that wasn't there. So again, perhaps it's a question of waiting for a tide. A different tide may well help. But anyway, it was a good attempt. 7.
Rebel.
Yeah, I'm a dog lover. Do enjoy dogs. I've seen a number of pictures taken of dogs, and this one is gorgeous. I think very, very well photographed. Light in the eye, the mouth open, the tongue. There's a certain alertness. Again, it's very symmetrical. There's the subject matter on the left is very similar to that's on the right. The tones that go through the image have been beautifully handled. The highlight areas, particularly sort of above its his eyes, and the little quiff it's got. Those their highlights are very subtle, and what you wouldn't want to do is to make those. Monochrome images are not all about having blacks and whites. Sometimes you don't want that. You certainly wouldn't want that if you're trying to create a foggy scene, because you just destroy the whole aesthetic. And I'm suggesting here that if you try to make those highlights in the curls that's above its right eye, which are perhaps some of the lightest have. If you try to dodge those to make them much whiter, it wouldn't look natural. I think it's a wonderful image, and also really like the background. This motley background suits the subject. The more I look at it, the more I appreciate it, and it would make a super print. So that was definitely another one I'm holding back.
Rhino lunchtime.
Yeah, I was judging last night. Loughton. It was Loughton versus a club in Australia, and there we had some big African wildlife, so that was a hippopotamus. Here we've got a rhinoceros, and they make wonderful subjects for monochrome. I was saying that when I retired, I was given, I don't do natural history, but I was given some money. They had a bit of a whip round, and I was in Ipswich, and I went into Waterstones, as you do, straight to the books. And I bought this book by Nick Brandt, and it was all about African wildlife. And I liked this book so much, I had to buy it there and then. If I could have come home, made a note of the title, come home, ordered it on Amazon, I would have got it cheaper. But it was one of those, I want it and I want it now. So whilst I don't do that type of photography, I do appreciate, those types of images. And this reminds me of that. So it's a really good subject. The hide of the rhino is just like elephants, because of the texture, make good photographic subjects. Here we can see the eye, we can see what appears to be a little bit of light in the eye. So all that's handled well. We can see a track, and there's some tire marks that's running through that, which is a little bit unfortunate. But I think the biggest issue I have with this image is the time of day. You know that the sun's up there high in the sky, so you've got the highlights, the lightness running across the back of the animal and creating the shadow as you come down on its lower part of its body. And I think that's just such a pity. If it was an overcast day or the light was slightly different, it would have been such a stronger picture. Nothing you could do about it. You're there, you take the picture, and you've done as best as you could have been reasonably expected given the circumstances. So it's all about memories, really. But as in tonight's competition, it's not quite as strong as the others because of some of these things that are out with your control, unfortunately. But nevertheless, it's still got an 8.
Rogan.
Yeah, another doggy picture. Another beautiful dog. I do like, as I said, like dogs. I like dogs with proper dog's noses and dog ears, and I like them with a towel. That's type of dog, and with a lovely coat. This dog has got Rogan, his name, has got an alertness. You can see the light in the eye, a slight tilt with the head. Looking directly at the photographer. The background is sort of motley, which it doesn't overpower the image. I can't help comparing it pictorially. Nothing wrong with the dog. It's a beautiful dog, very well captured. But I can't obviously help comparing it with the other dog picture that I saw, so this is more of a record shot. The other one had almost a bit more of an artistic feel to it. So this is an excellent image. And gets an 8.5.
Sell-off at Holborough Beach.
Yeah, it's obviously a much photographed subject. I've done it myself, and you either see images where it's the whole structure as we are given here. But also I've seen some also in colour where they've gone up and photographed just elements, and it's sort of going up much closer and just capturing sort of little parts of the structure itself, and they've made for some beautiful images. So here, it's very much, I think, a record shot of this particular structure. There's good tones that run through all the structure. You can see from the highlights, the shadow areas, the midtones, and it's on the beach, and there's a certain layering of on the sand, and then the grassiness that we see in the midground and the trees in the background. The sky, particularly a bit up in the top right-hand corner, seems to be breaking up just a little bit, but maybe that's just sort of a lighter part. So I think it's a decent image. Again, it's photographed on a bright day, not just by the shadows that you can see, but the fact that the shadows, even though they're running across the sand, are quite sharp. They're not. So it's not if they're slightly overcast day, you still get the shadows, but they'd be much softer around the edges. But here they're quite sharp. So it is rendered well. You just look at the structure itself, and the monochrome treatment is really excellent. It's got a metallic feel to it, so you've done that really, really good. I'm not sure when the photograph was taken, it was the right time at the right time of day. So given the circumstances, you've done an excellent job, and that got an 8.
Seen better days.
Yeah, another image of boat wrecks, and I wonder whether it was the same photographer. The problem is when you've got white hulls and white superstructure with, as we've seen here, and it might be they're yellow, but they're certainly monochrome from a monochromatic viewpoint, rendered as a light tone. They don't sort of quite work. And here you've got sort of effectively 3 boats that are so light, and it's difficult to make out where one starts, one finishes, where the background starts and finishes. So the tonal range, particularly in the highlight areas, is primarily because the paint color that we've got on the boats itself don't really sort of suit a monochrome treatment, I would suggest. Also, the composition is it's all quite sort of cluttered. I just wonder if you came back a little bit and maybe got a slightly higher elevation and got some separation between the boats in the foreground and maybe those that was in the background. Yeah, it may well have helped. I do appreciate the fact that the sky, there's not a lot of cloud in there, but there is a little bit of very subtle clouds. It's not pure white, and the last thing you would have wanted is for that to have been busy. So you've got some things that are working for you, but I think it's sort of composition, more particularly the subject matter, doesn't really suit in this particular case monochrome. So 7.5.
Central vision.
Yeah, it's a succulent. I don't know whether this was on a slightly elevated rockery. You've got down to it, but whatever, it's succulents and cacti, because of the shape and form, can make excellent image for monochrome. All sorts, and there's all sorts of varieties, so they do make good studies. I think what I like about this is not just you can see all the detail in the flower itself, but the flower head, the way the shape where it's coming out, and almost got this like jaw-like. It looks, you look at an image and it's got sort of some sort of feelings of being sort of out of science fiction, if you know what I mean. I think hopefully we know where I'm coming from, but it's got, that's that. It's got an interest apart from just being a flower. I think the shape, and I do enjoy the tones that we've got around it. The lightest part of the image is on the flower head itself, and that's where it should be. And then it's not quite as bright, but on the petals of the succulent, and then everything else around it is really there supporting the subject, the main subject, which is in the center of the image. So you've done a good job of all that, and the monochrome treatment and the detail. So 8.
Shadowy figure.
Yeah, staircases, we do see images of staircases, and some of them are quite ornate because they, equally they make good studies, and frequently what you do want is figures walking to and fro to add a bit more interest rather than just photographing the structure, as we've got here. The staircase, the balustrade is very sharp. I think the shapes, the curves that we've got, and the monochrome tones that we've got in those elements are very, very pleasing. So I like all that, and I like the movement we've got in the figure, particularly on his trailing foot, his hand, his head, and I also like the composition. It's very much a sort of portrait. This would have scored really, really, really highly because I think the monochromatically it's been really well handled. The only slight niggle is I would have liked to have seen a bit more on the left and the balustrade, the curvature of the balustrade on the hand on the right and the balustrading on the left, to have actually seen, so it's not cut off the way it's cut off. But I do enjoy the image. It's easy on the eye, it's simple, and I think, you know, the static nature of the staircase subject, and you can even make out a little bit of tone in the neck of the guy as he's walking up. So I held that one back because I just simply liked it.
Southwold here.
Yeah, it is a beautiful place, isn't it? You know, and of course, you know, we do see a number of images of this pier for all the right reasons. Why shouldn't you? Because you go there and you photograph it yourself. Every day is different, the state of tide is different, the light is different, and then you've got a choice for, you know, what shutter speed you're going to use for the image. And here there's clearly a slow shutter speed being given. You can see that in the slight milkiness in the sea. But there is detail in the waves, and, you know, and interesting tones as you look along the sea. I do like the little bit of froth that we've got just kissing the beach. It's a wide angle shot, or it's stitched, but it doesn't really matter. It's almost like it's letterboxy for all the right reasons. There appears to be some sort of dust bunnies, 3 little dust bunnies or spots over at the top left. And the more, when you've seen, it's one of those things when you've seen them, and there's also another one, a couple along the top. I would either clean your sensor or remove them. They're a minor distraction, but they are minor with a very small m. The tones that we've got in the pier itself, and the dark areas, the mid-tone areas, the highlight areas, there's good detail running all the way through that, and indeed on the rocks themselves. So I think it is an image that you've captured very well, and I think it does make quite a striking monochrome. One suggestion I would make, and I do this because you can in photography, is the buildings themselves look long and narrow, and what I suggest you might want to try, given this, is, because that's wide angle, is actually to stretch the verticals to actually make the buildings much more elongated, and it would also make them bigger in the frame, and I think that would have helped this image. You know, so you look at an image you've captured, and then by stretching and pulling an image, sometimes you give them just a little bit more emphasis, and I think this is actually benefit from that. You can actually go over the top, and sometimes that makes interesting images as well. So just something to think about. 8.5.
Spinnaker Tower.
Yeah, is this the one that's down in Southampton? I'm not sure, but anyway, it's an interesting subject. It appears to have been taken, you know, is that against what we're led to believe, I guess, is a night shot and a starry sky, or has that been put in post? Because there's an awful lot of stars, but maybe it is. And if that is the case, bearing in mind there's a certain milkiness in the sky, there's, from a monochrome point of view, the structure itself makes a good subject because of the shape and forms and the elegance of it. But equally, when you get skies, and sometimes, you know, we've seen them where the colors are just beautiful, you know, what would the color version look like, I wonder. So it's just, I'm asking myself sort of various questions. Here again, it's a letterbox, but very much a sort of a vertical letterbox, which suits suits obviously the subject matter. I'm just finding my eyes are compete, because the sky and because what I'm taking to be the stars are, you know, there's so many of them and so bright. I'm finding that, you know, the highlight areas of the stars are drawing my eye away from the subject itself. And I think it's just the structure is what I really want to be looking at, given it as a monochrome. Maybe if it was a colour, it'd be a different sort of scenario. So I've given that one an 8.
Sunburnt.
This intrigued me. You know, the title doesn't, it's called Sunburnt. I'm looking at the shape and I'm thinking, well, what is it? It almost looks, is it a gnarl of a tree? Is it a structure that's growing out of the sand? Is it a leg of a chicken? I don't know. I don't think it is a leg of a chicken. You can understand and forgive me for, you know, asking, well, what is it I'm actually looking at? I don't really know, but I am intrigued by it. You've got these 3 figures in the in the background. They're slightly blurry. You've got this differential focus, and that's good because the emphasis should very much be on the structure and the way it's sort of erupting from whatever is it sand or is it salt or just what is it? Is it an old tree stump that is being fossilized? I really don't know. Equally, how big is it? Because is it actually quite small? And the photographer has actually created this illusion of it being very, very big and very powerful. And the 3 little figures in the background actually give this image scale, and maybe it's deceiving the eyes. The background is the sky has got these sort of very sort of light mid-tone textures running through it, and there seems to be light coming from behind this structure we see, but there is good detail on the structure. So I really would like to know what it is. Do I like it? Oh yes, I do, because it's very different and it asks questions. So another one I held back. Super.
Swirls.
Yeah, smoke and candles, and you get various things to actually create these sort of shapes. And it's not something I've done myself, but I've seen quite a lot of images of them, and perhaps sometimes you get lucky, and perhaps it's one of those things that more you play around with it, the better it becomes and the more interesting shapes that you get. And as we've got here, this is very much a letterbox in its proportions, even more so than some of the others that we've seen, and I can understand why. As a monochrome, I think it works well. There is a certain, I'm looking at the shapes, the circles, and they're just been really beautifully sort of captured. There's a certain poetry in the image when I'm sort of looking at it, and it's one of those, the more you look at, the more you enjoy it. There's a limited range of tones. It's predominantly highlights and shadows, with very little in between. But it's a very, very pleasing image, and it's another one I held back. And I also like the very subtle key line you've got around the image as well.
Tea room.
Yeah, this lady sitting in the tea room just enjoying a cup of tea, got a woolly hat on, a woolly socks, woolly jumper, looking at a menu or something. You've got a bit of light coming onto her face, which is all good. You're looking around the image, and even you've got detail on the parquet, what appears to be parquet flooring. The camera angle is quite low, so did you have your camera on is it a mirrorless or a touch screen, and your head resting on a chair? Because it seemed to be a lower angle than the tabletop. And that's quite often good. Taking images either from a higher viewpoint or a lower viewpoint. So with the chairs, there's quite a lot of chairs. So in many ways, it's a busy image. But having said that, the subject stands out really well. The light on her face and coming down her face and on the front of her chest is all good. And even under the table, which is clearly obviously in shadow areas, you can even make out the detail in her sock. So it's a candid study. Also, I meant to comment tonight about the verticals, and here you've got the verticals vertical. And finally, I like the fact that the way the chair, the main chair that we see in the foreground, you've given us the whole of the chair. You haven't just chopped off the bottom, so you can see where it's actually resting on the ground. So it's a very pleasing image, and I gave that one an 8.5.
The art of baking.
Yep, it's all there for you. And sometimes you look around your home and there are pictures to be made if you have a seeing eye and a sense of creativity. And here, we know they're just, they're pastry cutters, and we've got a number of them. The one in the smaller one has been set at a slight angle. Again, it's an image that is predominantly made up of dark tones and highlight tones with some mid-tones, but not an awful lot of them. When I looked at the image, it reminded me of an oyster shell, to be quite honest. It's a bit like some of the other images. You look at an image and it sort of resonates as being something else. And that's what I thought when I looked at this. It's all about the reflections. Without the reflection, and a stronger reflection, it wouldn't be quite as strong, but I like the way it's been framed. You're going to space on the left and space on the right. It's not quite as exciting as some of these other images tonight, but nevertheless, you've photographed it, you've seen it, you've made the image, and you've photographed it and also rendered it as a monochrome very well. So that got an 8.
3.
Is it 3 wise men, is this? Yeah?
3. Just 3.
Oh, just 3. Okay. Right. I had 3 wise men. Okay, just 3. Perhaps that's... Yeah, so 3.
There is another one called that.
Right, fine. Yeah, I mentioned before about sort of people when you want sort of separation in their limbs, and here we've got 3. They've both got strides. The middle one and the one over the left is obviously a longer stride, and the one at the front, slight cocking of the knee, and there's sort of a fairly equally spaced distance. Background, you've got the obviously the old brickwork, and you wonder what was in that. Looks like a sort of a window frame. Was that a window frame? Was that a door that's been bricked in? Don't really know. It's an interesting shape to see in the flank of a wall. There seemed to be a wooden bridge in the background of some sort. Is this sort of Cambridge? I don't know. So yeah, it's an interesting picture. Not overly exciting, but it's a moment captured. And I think it's all about the timing of the 3 people walking along, and you've got good space between the subjects, and the subjects have been well captured tonally. 8.
3 wise men.
We presumably, I don't know, were these sort of 3 ornaments that you have acquired and are in your home, and you've decided to make a study of them? Were they something you saw when you were in foreign parts? Interestingly, in this image, it's a square image with slightly rounded corners, which I think actually adds quite often doing that, perhaps is not so wise, but in this particular case, I think it suits the image. So well done on that. The subjects themselves, I think, are clearly interesting. Okay, they're perhaps made by somebody else, but you've created this little study. And I think the separation you've got between the one at the front, then the taller one in the middle, and the one that's at the back, I think that's all works particularly well together. The dark tones, in the shadow areas, you've almost lost them. The highlights or the mid-tones, you can just make out sort of subtle detail. And I think in many ways that adds to the enjoyment. There's a certain sort of softness running over the themselves and the way they're portrayed. And I think it's a very pleasing image. And what is most important, and it's not something I think you would initially appreciate, is a bit of white negative space over on the left in front of the 3 figures, and a smaller bit on side at the top. I think in terms of the composition, it's been very, very well handled. I think it's a very interesting and pleasing image. So I held that one back.
Removal.
Yeah, this image, I mentioned before about some images, in monochrome don't have to be black, and whites. Very little whites in this particular image. Probably on the ear, the furthest ear is as close as it gets. So as a monochrome, it has been very, very subtly handled. You look at the detail, the fur on the creature itself, and it's all there. You haven't tried to make it overly sharp. You haven't tried to make this image overly contrasty, bringing up the clarity. And I'm pleased about that, because you would have spoilt the aesthetic. Some images you need that, others you don't. So I think this image from a monochrome has been really sensitively handled. There's light in the eye. There's life in the creature itself. You can just see that, and the way then you look on the bird, which is very tonally, is very much sort of at the darker end of the spectrum, but you can still make out all the detail in his feathers, his plumage, the shine you've got on the claw. You can't see the eye of the bird. You don't need to. The bird is part of the picture. Compositionally, I like the way you look at. So you capture the neck, and you're just given just a little bit of the back, and the way that sort of that element on the coat down in the bottom left hand side of the frame, I think is exquisite. The background, I mentioned before, didn't I, about importance of background, just so suits this image. The way in the foreground you got this sort of filigree, this delicacy of the grasses or whatever, and they gradually fade out, but not to pure. They've still got a variety of tones and texture, but it's very subtle through the image. You look at the image. I mentioned before about sort of images in photography. You've got to try and create sort of a 3D aesthetic, and this really, as an image, exemplifies that. It would make a beautiful, beautiful print. You need to make it as a print. It's a gorgeous image, and one that I'm definitely held back.
Tour guide.
Yeah, the interesting here is that the lady, you look at her facial features. She seems to have a certain sort of oriental type look to her. She's got silvery type shoes on, white stockings, a white coat, a white skirt, so it's an image that you could easily capture and get the exposure totally wrong. You can see all the detail in all those light white areas. You got the sign. It's when you actually read, you can see the sign. She's obviously a tour guide, and it says Cambridge Tours. So you obviously know where it is. There's a building, one of obviously the amazing bits of architecture you see in Cambridge. I've been there sort of twice in the last 3 weeks, just doing some street photography with Chrissy Hart, her and I go out quite a bit, just capturing various things that we see. And this is really, really good. Okay, the figure is placed bang in the center. Sometimes that's a big no-no, but sometimes it works, as it does here. There's good detail on her face. She's obviously looking for a bit of custom. Her gloves are quite interesting, sort of skeleton type pattern on them. You've got a sign in the background that is blurry, but you think, well, should that be removed? Well, in some ways, it actually adds a little bit of balance, I think, to this image. Ordinarily, especially as you can't read the writing, and judges say, oh, if you've got writing, you need to be able to read them. But in this case, I don't find it an issue. The verticals are vertical, the horizontals are virtually horizontal. The main subject has got good detail running through, as I've said, so that's held back.
Trawler at anchor.
We see reasonable detail in the in the shingle. You've got the boat that you've captured well. I'm just trying to look behind my camera because it's obscuring the top. There's a bit of antennae at the top, and you've held all those in. The sea at the horizon is horizontal. The anchor you've got in the foreground, you've just shown us part of that. It is quite dominant. It fills sort of half of the picture space, and I just wonder whether the image would have been better, sort of ignoring that, perhaps gone in front of the anchor and used the cable or the rope that we've got coming in from the left-hand side and wiggling its way across the sand and creating this S shape, whether that would have sort of been sufficient to lead the eye. I just find the anchor, because we haven't got all of it, we've just got part of it. Your eye needs to get over that to see the boat, and it's really the boat which is sharp and tonally is very good. We've seen some other boats earlier on which are white, or tonally is very much on the highlight areas, but because we've got the windows and other elements that are dark in tone, it works. I just think the composition is the anchor that really puts me off. 8.
Tuning forks.
How creative this image is. It's tuning forks, but you've actually created, a set of musical notes. I don't know what the notes, what the lines are made of. Are they twine? Are they rope? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The fact that it's creating this sort of sine wave in shape. And you've got five of these forks with is that a tree ball mint, extra strong tree ball mint that we see at the base of the forks. I don't know. And the extra element, and it's only a small part of the picture, is that we've got over the sort of the cross, if you like, the 4 little bits that form in this diamond shape, or almost like fish shape, over on the left hand side, leading us into the picture. Really adds a sort of like a bit of a punctuation mark, if you will. It's an image that is very much tonally, there's not a huge range of tones through the image. There doesn't need to be. It's a very creative, and the person who photographed it, and I believe it's something you've created all for yourself, is a very creative person, and I applaud that. I also like the way, just the 5, if you like, horizontal bits of twine, the way that they finish. They're not equal, the ends are not equally in a line. It's very sinuous. So a very clever, interesting image, and very original, and I want to hold back.
2 clay models.
I have seen this image before, and in fact, I might have seen it. This might be the 3rd time of viewing it. So, there's no secrets there. I think it's a fairly well-known image, and it's an image that I think I do really enjoy. I like photographing people. I quite enjoy nude photography, but when I say that, and I've only ever done it once, it's art nude. And I only did that once some years back, and really did enjoy it. And the difference between art nude and glamour nude is, it's not, you tend to be lighting the subject from the side and from the back, not from the front, where you're leaving nothing to the imagination. So it's very much a piece of art, as we've got here. Excellent range of tones. I like the texture that we've got running through. You can see the faces, and I think that, you know, the hands, everything about this image is frankly superb. So another held back.
Velvet Jones.
Great hairdo. I like what she's holding. It's an image that clearly suits the monochrome treatment. You've got a direct gaze at the photographer. And we've got space for the most part around the image. We haven't got separation from the limbs, but but because we've got whatever she's holding is actually providing some sort of degree of separation and interest, and in many ways complements the hair. I think that's what suits the image. I do find the face and the skin tones is a little bit overly bright. But I did enjoy it, and it's another one I held back. I've got all these marks that are held back, so don't worry.
Wadi Rum, sorry.
Wadi Rum, yeah. What a fantastic landscape. This lone tree down in the on that sort of third. Interesting sky. You see good recession that we've got running through this quite wild, almost like barren landscape. Clearly, it's one that has been visited by vehicles. You can see that, and with all the tracks that we've got running through them. Quite often, when you've got tracks of vehicles running through an image or footprints, they frequently spoil the image. But I think in this particular case, because there are so many, they almost like add texture and shape and form an interest in their own right, which is a strange thing to say. I just feel that it's a cracking location. I think it's been well photographed. I just don't feel that the tones have been handled at their best. It looks sort of fairly, you know, fairly flat. I think there is an image in this particular case where it could do with a bit more contrast. I think I would darken some of the darker areas of the sky, but then with using sort of various dodge and burn techniques. And my favorite technique is using a 50% gray layer and a paintbrush set to sort of 300% opacity, but only sort of just sort of 3%. So it's very, very fine. So I would dodge and burn this image to create a much greater depth of field when you're looking through, so that the background, you've got more recession, and bring the image to life. I think that's really what it can deal with. It's a little bit overly grey at the moment. It's all there. It's just an image to be worked on. 8.5.
And the final image of the evening, Words We Roll.
Yeah, an awful lot of work. Again, it's another image that is clearly been by a creative photographer. An awful lot of work has gone into it in terms of, the book, putting it against the sky, the birds, the waterfall flowing through the book and through the landscape that we've seen that's open, and then out of the picture. So, it must have spent, the person must have spent hours doing this. The question is, presented with the end result, does it work? Almost, but not quite. I feel that if looking at the image, the sky, I think I would mute some of the sky over on the left-hand side. I think I would play around with that. The way the water is flowing out from the book and down out through the bottom of the picture space, I think there needs to be much better sort of tonal contrast separation. Certainly dodging and burning, using that same technique, which perhaps it's really well worth knowing. So what you need is you create a set. You can create. I've got an action for it. What you do is you create a blank layer. You fill it with 50% grey. You set the blending mode to overlay or soft light. That's really important. And you use a paintbrush. Either if you want it dark, you set it to black foreground. If you want it light, you set it to white foreground. And you have something like 100% opacity, but have the flow way down, something like 3%. So gradually you're building up, the dodging and burning. What you don't, by doing that, what you don't get, unlike using the dodge and burn tool in Photoshop, if you handle it correctly, you don't get where where what you're dodging and burning becomes not white or black, it becomes sort of grayish color. It's really good to look it up on YouTube, dodging and burning with 50% gray. And that's what I would have done, because you're using a very, very low flow rate. You can actually gradually build up either the tones you want to make darker or the tones you want to make lighter. And there's this flowing water. That's really what this is crying out for, the flowing water. You really want to try and make that really, really lifelike. So it was a good attempt. A lot of work. I think it could just be improved to just give it a bit more punch where that water looks more lifelike. I gave that an 8.
Okay, we will go to the 17 held images.
Okay, so I'm just going to read that scores. So these were.
Shall I go through one at a time?
Well, it's okay. Yeah, the shadowy figure. Shadowy figure. That's not. Let me just bear with me one moment. I need to scroll down. Yeah, shadowy figure, which you've got as number 2. That got a 9.5.
I think we'll have to do something different then.
Yep, that got 9.5.
Daydreaming.
So I did enjoy that. That would have got a 10 if the cloth that's laying on the ground above her head was removed. I just found that a little bit of a distraction, but as it was, it still got a 9.5.
Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, that got a 9.
Rolling along.
Just rolling along. Just bear with me one moment. I've lost that for a moment. Yeah, a really, really good seeing eye. So you've got 2 figures. There's a message that comes across. There is a certain. I did an image that was taken in Cuba that was quite successful to me, and it was a lady and a dog. But here you could see, and it was called Similarities. And both the dog and it appeared a lady had a tongue sticking out. It wasn't, it was a lip. But this reminded me of that. It's just a bit of street photography. And this is a very similar thing. So this got a 9.5. Yep. This got a 9.
Swirls.
Yes, simple in some ways, but you wonder how many images you take and of this sort of smoke to actually get one that's as good as this. 9.
Rebel.
Excellent. 10.
Lady in White.
Lady in White got a 9.
Layer Mask.
Yeah, it's an image perhaps that wouldn't appeal to all judges, perhaps, but it's natural. It tells a good story. the placement of the subjects, not just the people, but even, you know, that's in the background with the pictures. It is just such an interesting image. 9.5.
3 wise men.
Yeah, great. I like this. And the more I look at it, the more I like it. 9.
Removal.
Super, super image for all the reasons. I'm not going to repeat what I said. Got a 10.
Somber.
I do need to know what I'm actually looking at. It's such an intriguing image, so original and different to what we've seen. You know, when you get judge and so active as I am, both in terms of clubs and exhibitions, to see something that is very, very different is always a delight, especially if it's an interesting image as this is. 9.5.
Velvet Jones.
Yeah, Velvet Jones. I think it got a 9. It would have got more if the skin tones weren't quite as bright.
Silver.
Yeah, Tour Guide got a 9.
My little stalker.
Yeah, brilliant, isn't it? 10. The guy's probably totally innocent. But I'd still arrest him. Yeah, super, super image. This was another 10.
And tuning forks.
Yeah, another original creative bit of work, and we've seen quite a lot of creativity tonight, which is a delight. So tuning forks got a 9.5.
That's the last of the health facts, and we will go to, hopefully to the skills.
You want to know my favourite image? Yep. You can show all the 10s or just my favourite? Because you know what it is.
It should be coming up as
okay.
the 10, but I'm not sure what's happened. Each score equals 10.
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, I think these are so, well, they're so different, but each of them are so worthy of top scores. My favourite, though, is tick removal. I think it's just such a, you look at, well, I would like each of those 4 to be mine, but that image, particularly, I could see it as a print, and tonight is supposed to be a sort of print competition. I think on the right sort of choice of paper, and you wouldn't want this image on a glossy type of paper. You'd want it on an arty type paper, I think, because you want sort of some of the textures to come out. That's my own personal opinion. That's what I would print it on, that type of paper. But it's a cracking image. Well done to the photographer, and well done to you all tonight. It's been really, really, really enjoyable tonight, and I'm not just saying it. You should be congratulated. Well done.
I think we should be able to get that. One was Tori Andrews. Andrew Carpenter. Roger Cuthbert. I think you want to.
So whose was tick?
Tori Andrews.
Oh, was it? Okay, well done, Tori.
See, just this. 3 further 10s. fantastic image. I'm going to hand over to Steve. Steve, I think, is going to do some final words.
Yes, well, Roy, what can I say except for thank you very, very much. We've never had a judge before who quite appreciated, or at least verbalized his appreciation of the difference between prints and PDIs, I don't think. And certainly not to the extent that they would actually recommend the paper. And for me, that was a massive, massive learning curve because I've never quite known what paper to pick. So I really like the idea that you told us that we had to use gloss for really deep blacks, and we use textured paper and arty paper for different subject matter. So thank you for that. It was really good. It's nice that I know you like prints over PDI, and it's a great shame that we had to try and get you to imagine that our PDIs were prints. But I have to say that doesn't allow you to go into Photoshop and expand the image and find the spread eagle or whatever it was, because if they were prints, you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's definitely cheating. I'm pleased that you like infrared, although we get very few infrareds. I really like infrareds, and John Kay, I think, one of our new members, really likes infrareds. It'd be good to see some more of those.
Yeah.
I think we learnt that you think, and quite correctly, that still lives are very difficult, and placement is absolutely fundamental, and sharpness, and using an odd number of objects. I think that reinforced some of our thoughts about that. I like some of your expressions. I remember recently a judge said something like a photograph looked comfortable in the frame. And I thought that was a delightful phrase. And tonight, you just slightly overcome that as my favourite phrase when you said something that didn't kiss the eye. I thought that was quite poetic. So well done for that. If that's yours, congratulations. That was absolutely brilliant. We also learnt that you love Toblerone. And next time, as a great coffee lover, I've got to buy a Toblerone and see if my little strong espressos go well with the Toblerone. So thanks for that little nugget of information, that little diamond of information. It went really well with, we have to create a 3D aesthetic. And that I enjoyed too, because that is exactly what we often try to do. I thought your marking was bold, a lot of 8 and 8.5s, which I hope reflects a high standard. Brave enough to give some 6s and 6.5, which is what we want, because we want marks relative to the best. Lots and lots of held back images, some absolutely fabulous stuff from the members, I thought. Absolutely loved the smoke, absolutely brilliant. And I particularly enjoyed whoever it is who can make music with pastry, with fish forks. Toblerone mints, were they? But best of all, in 5/4 time. Did anybody notice that? 5 crotchets in the bar? That's very unusual. Only Dave Brubrecht does that normally. So well done for that. Roy, you judge for us every year, and it's always a delight. I have to say, you feel really like a friend of the club, because your criticisms are creative, your suggestions are all realistic and feasible. I can't say how much I've enjoyed this evening. Monochrome, my favourite form of photography. I suspect yours as well. It's been an absolute delight this evening. I'd like all the members who are still with us to raise their hands, do some whoops, do some cheers, clap.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, as I say, yeah, I've really enjoyed tonight. Yeah, I did give quite a lot of 8.5s, but you know, and there was a lot of high marks, and that's what it deserved. You know, rightfully, I'm quite happy to mark down to 5, but there was really no real bummers tonight. The last tip I'm going to leave you with, though, is you know, Toblerone is good with coffee. If you like espresso and dark, it was again one of my sons. My younger son actually gave it to me Christmas. Is Lindt chocolate? You know, Lindt do one, and it's chili. So it's a dark chocolate, but chili flavour, and that chili flavoured Lindt chocolate with coffee, especially if you're into espresso. Oh, it's wonderful. It's also very nice with a drop of whiskey. So, you know, those two tips, trust me, those two tips tonight on chocolate and drink is far more important than anything I've said about photography.
Like it there. Nice one.
My congratulations go to Susan. She said it's first night tonight. Hasn't she done a super job?
Yeah.
Well, it's been brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent job. Ran really smoothly.
Yeah. Thanks to everybody.
Can I just
before we go, folks, next meeting 2 weeks' time is a talk by Steve Williams on street photography. So that should be good. So hope to see lots of people there. And thank you again, Roy. It was great.
Roy, to put you out of your agony,
Right.
The sunburnt image.
Oh yeah.
That was a piece of charcoal wood from a peat bonfire.